And the thing about these museums, or this museum, are all those little cameos that come to mind when you see the cars, and wow, this is, and here's the main part of the conference centre, well, the museum. And is that what you call it, a museum?
I think in terms of how we market it and communicate it, we call it the Grand Prix Collection as we market it as part of our conference centre, but internally we call it the museum. A Bob Davis, a Colin Watts will say, I'm just going across to the museum to get a reference for a car I'm working on, or somebody will call me up and say, can you show somebody around the museum for your father? So we affectionately call it that. And
I love the lighting, Jonny. Probably not brilliant on the video, but it's great in real life, and I don't want to play around with it and start putting artificial lighting in, because you've done it so well. The uplighting and having the dark surrounds and then the cars lit, I think works really well.
How it works is, when this is the third evolution of Grand Prix Collection, and when we moved into this facility 10 years ago, we decided that we wanted to ease the burden, if you like, well, not burden, but ease the schedule on our marketing department, because when a client, an organisation would hire the conference centre, they would have to be toured through here by a member of our marketing department. When it's doing good business, that can be several times a week, many times a week. So we said, okay, let's make it automated, which it is. So you follow the story of Williams' history around in a series of movies, which are portrayed by these projectors you can occasionally see. But how we heard the groups, and you can be talking 50 to 100 people from one era to another, is when you arrive in the collection, the original cars, the green and whites around which the first movie is set, will be illuminated, but the rest will be in darkness. And as the first movie concludes and the second one's about to start, the lights will dim in the first section and illuminate in this section, so people naturally follow the light around, and then they get told the story of the cars via those 5 movies. So we actually use the light to guide people through the collection. So if this was an automated tour, this would mostly be dark. You would just see rough shapes and silhouettes in the distance.
Even more impressive, yeah.
Yes.
Very good, very good.
I hope so.
Well, let's go and have a look at these Williams FW10, FW11, FW09, the Honda era.
Turbos.
Well, this is an era very close to my heart, because your dad very kindly asked me to join the company in end of '84, actually.
End of '84.
Yeah, and just when
Nigel was joining.
Yeah, I've done a lot of hard work with your dad. Well, that year I don't know how many proposals I did to your dad to try to get him to hire Nigel. And when he first, I think he drove that car at Donington for the first time from memory. And
he did, yeah.
He got into the car and he couldn't believe how bad the throttle lag was relative to the Lotus Renault.
It was like a light switch, the power delivery of the FW09, and our first experience with a Honda. Yeah, I think he wasn't the most comfortable in that car. Obviously, the FW09, a car created around 2 drivers of quite smaller frame than Nigel, Rosberg and Jacques Lafitte. So there is quite a distinctive cutaway chassis representing Nigel somewhere. Unfortunately, not one of these cars.
The big difference, I think, from memory from the time, Patrick will probably say this is all wrong, but the big difference that I recall was that the turbos on the Williams Hondas were much, much larger than the Renault turbos he'd been using on the Renault engine. And one of the first things they did as a result of that Nigel test was go to much smaller turbos. And as soon as they did that, they had very little drop-off in power, and they had much better throttle response, and that's where the big change came.
I think, just ducking away from the immediate subject matter, you've touched upon an area of Nigel Mansell that's not often talked about, which was just how technically involved and precise he was with his racing cars. And that's a very similar story, the one you've just told, to when he arrived for the commencement of his second stint at Williams, when he tested the 1990 FW13B as in preparation for his first year back with us in 1991, and he couldn't believe how stiffly sprung the car was. And he just said, go into the truck and find the softest springs you've got, which probably had cobwebs on them by that stage of 1990, given the setup philosophy that we ran through that year. And he took 4 seconds off the FW13B's best time ever around Paul Ricard at the end of season tests. And I think Patrick has stated somewhere that he sat there highly bemused on his flight home from Ricard, thinking, we wasted the whole of that year by going completely the wrong direction with setup, and it just took Nigel's touch to sort of bring us back in line. So FW13B, twice a winner in 1990, was probably a far better car than it actually ran during the course of that season. So no.
Well, we'll have a look at that in a minute, I guess. But
yeah, we will.
Jonny, this is. I've forgotten how to tell the difference between a 10A and a 10B. The 10B first raced, I think, at Brands, right?
It did. So the 10B has a 100% strike record. It was the car we used for the final 3 Grand Prix of 1985, and it won all 3 of those in Brands, Kyalami, and the first Grand Prix around the streets of Adelaide. This is actually the original specification car. You would look for a car that is essentially better packaged at the rear. The suspension is much neater, much lower, and therefore that brings around a much sort of lower drop, a much more tighter sort of finish to the engine cover.
Enrique Scalabroni did most of the design work on the 10B. Yeah, he joined the company that year. We were all bemused, to use your word, by the diesel-engine taxis that used to pull up outside the factory every morning, and Enrique would enlight this wonderful Argentine Father Christmas-like figure. And of course it's because he's never driven a road car in his life, never had a driving license.
He's still never driven a road car.
Well, he doesn't trust himself behind the wheel because he's so brilliant. His brain is so...
I know, but he is the creator of some of the 80s and 90s finest racing cars.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then a successful team owner in F3000 and GP2 in later years. And I even drove him away from your house in West Ilsley in a Renault 5 once in the freezing cold, and he gave me a lecture on how to basically get it going much better using the choke on those very cold starts. So something I have forgotten, because the cars I'm lucky enough to buy these days don't have manual chokes anymore, but this little Renault 5 did. So, quite a guy. And
being obviously quite close to Nigel for so many years, that first win at Brands Hatch was, it was an indescribable moment, really, so I shouldn't really describe any more of it. It was just like, wow, it's finally happened. And that it happened in a car as beautiful as the FW10B.
It was a very special race, Brands Hatch. It was the intensity at the front, and you talk about having 6 world champions on today's grid, but if you look at you had Prost on his way to sealing his first World Drivers' World Championship. You had of course, you didn't have Niki Lauda there for that one weekend. John Watson deputised for him, but of course you had future world champions Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna disputing the win, and a rather irate former world champion, Keke Rosberg, rather manipulating the win in favour of one of those guys over the other, which I think was still one of the with all due respect to Ayrton Senna, a driver that we're all greatly fond of round here, and it was a fantastic sort of switch move that our 2 drivers pulled on him early in the race that saw Mansell sail off into the distance.
Sheridan Thin was working with me in the commercial department, very sadly missed as well, dear Sheridan, and together Sheridan and I basically did this colour scheme. And it was quite difficult, because if you look at the 09, you can see how many names were on the car, and they'd basically been put anywhere, kind of.
On the old green and white livery, which had been created around
with the Keke Rosberg, Guy Edwards yellow ICI around the cockpit, which was always going to be there, but it extended more, it was a bigger deal. And one of the nice things about that ICI sponsorship, and I still maintain it's one of the most successful practical sponsorships ever in the history of Formula One, is that ICI guaranteed the money to Williams for that space and then sublet the space to their customers, in this case Tactile Fibre, which is one of the companies that used ICI products in their clothing. So that was very good use, and ICI pioneered the use of Formula One for hospitality. They had an old double-decker bus, painted yellow, and they used to have 150 guests at every race. And then the Paddock Club came along, and suddenly the double-decker bus couldn't get into Grand Prix anymore. Very sad.
Really?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. It was the French Grand Prix, and and they just suddenly couldn't get it in. And then Mobil One, we decided a blue central theme to the car with the stripe, but it was very difficult getting the Mobil One actually to fit there. But I think in retrospect it actually looks very nice, and those details, you see where the Calma is and the curve of the side pod relative to the M, was the subject of weeks of discussion and planning.
Of getting the correct proximity so as not to disturb each other.
Exactly. And then obviously Honda had to be near the engine. And Denim were on the car. That was a Unilever product. And I was amused to hear at the beginning of this year when Lotus F1 announced their sponsors. They said, we have sponsorship from Unilever. The first time Unilever have ever been in Formula One. And I thought, well, you know, that's not right. The denim aftershave is a Unilever product. And then the mobile Pegasus down on the bottom of the rear wing end plate had to be exactly the right angle as well. This is a lovely car. This is the Rosberg car, obviously, with the but it's on its good years. What more could a man want?